Shall we start? Okay, so thank you very much to all of you for coming and joining us in our second EURAM online conference. We hope that next year we will be able to see each other face-to-face again. I would like to introduce the 2021 Strategic Management SIG team. We and Sophia and Annabelle are pleased to have such a great team composed by our SIG program co-chairs, Danny and Anna, SIG program co-chairs of kickoff activities, Nuno and Katharina, and our great communication and social events chair, David. It has been a pleasure to work with them to organize EURAM 2021. We also thank our SIG advisors, Tomi, Joan Enrique, and Henk. They three have been contributing to our SIG for many years. These are the topics of the SIG: behavioral strategy, ambidexterity, strategic processes and practice, business model, competition, ecosystems, networks and alliances, merger and acquisitions and divestitures, micro-foundation of a strategy, business ecosystem, strategic foresights, digital strategy and artificial intelligence. In every topic, there is a team. So as you can see, there is a huge team working to organize this event, and we are grateful to all of them. Now, my colleague and Sophie would like to present our events for this online conference. Thank you to all of you for attending and being part of the community.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Could you please move to the next slide?
Yes, I'm trying.
Okay, sorry. Great.
I don't know why it's stuck.
Okay.
No.
Perfect. So I will briefly present the program of this morning. We'll have two very interesting panels organized by our super program chairs, so Katharina, Cepa, and Nuno, Oliveira. In the first panel, and the two panels host top scholars and great scholars in strategic management. So in the first panel, Henk, Volberda, and Anna Grandori, sorry if I mispronounce the names, will open discussions about strategic management and sustainability perspectives. And in the second panel, Tomi Laamanen and Martin Parker will try to answer the question, where to go from here? In addition to this kickoff meeting and these two great panels, we will have two additional meetings and events. The first one is a social event that we try to organize even though the conference is online. So it will be an online wine tasting. This event has been organized by David Santana, and it will be on Thursday, so tomorrow at 7 p.m. For those who registered to the event, you might have received a bottle of wine at your place. And for those who did not register, you still can come and join the event. So bring your own wine, the drink basically that you like, and come to have some chit chat with us and to hang out with us. So you are more than welcome to join, even though you haven't registered to the event previously. And finally, on Friday at 11:30 p.m., we'll have the wrap up. So we will share information about the SIG, the future of it, and about the next conference. And above all, we will have our traditional award ceremony. So come to see if you got an award. I'm now leaving the floor to Katharina and Nuno. And on the behalf of the team, I would like to wish you a nice conference, and I look forward to seeing you in the sessions.
Okay, hi. I'm so happy to see so many of you here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And yeah, I'm very, very much looking forward to the conference. So let's jump right in. You've seen the program, so maybe I don't need to pull up my own slide. It was just one slide, really. So in the first panel of this session, we're going to have a look at strategic management and sustainability perspectives. So we're going to have two panelists. Henk Volberda, who's going to talk about corporate purpose and CSR, and Anna Grandori, who's going to talk about revisiting social responsibility and sustainability for an uncertain world. So we were thinking that we first have the first presentation, then there will be room for 1 or 2 clarification questions. Then we move to the second speaker, another clarification question and a short, a couple of questions maybe to wrap up the first part, and then I'll hand over to the second part of the panel to Nuno and the remaining panelists. So let's get started right away. So I'll hand over to Henk, if you would like to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Katharina. Can you see my slides?
Yes,
Yes.
we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. Yes, so I would like to have a short presentation on purpose-driven strategy, a stake in society, and this presentation I benefited a lot also from my colleague Puspika Viswanathan, so that's why I also put her here on the first slide. Actually, yeah, the question is, should companies have a purpose? And of course, we know there are many initiatives, for instance, on the EU, but also on national level. For instance, in the Netherlands, there is a Dutch corporate governance code that wants companies to focus on their long term, and also some professors want that companies also actually have to formalize their contribution to society. And even in the United States, where they invented the shareholder model, there has been a CEO pledge to focus on value creation, purpose, and stakeholders. Of course, there are inspirational companies like Unilever that had a very strong purpose, reducing poverty. But of course, then there was a hostile takeover by Heinz Kraft, and they had to respond and to refocus again on shareholder value, restructuring, buyback of shares, etc. And maybe a recent example of Shell, maybe a company, a very strong shareholder focus that has to reconsider maybe its purpose because of NGOs and a recent case where Dutch courts forces them to accelerate emission cuts. So there's a lot of discussion about purpose, about if companies should be more purpose-driven. And so this is also a very actual debate in the strategy field. And what I would like to do is first to discuss the definition of purpose-driven strategy. What is it? And also, is it something new? And how does it differentiate from, let's say, corporate social responsibility and sustainability? And secondly, I think, yeah, we need to have more empirical research here. And actually, we have done some quantitative research, but also some qualitative research. I will focus on this qualitative research, where we have studied many large Dutch companies, why and how they implement a purpose-driven strategy, and what do they achieve with a purpose-driven strategy. Okay, let's start with defining the concept. What is purpose? More recently, we see some also more theoretical papers on purpose-driven strategies. But I just pick two definitions. Yeah, purpose is a concrete goal or object for the firm that reaches beyond profit maximization, from Rebecca Henderson. But also World Economic Forum has a definition: to produce profitable solutions to problems of people and planet, instead of profit from producing problems for people or planet. And of course, then the question arises, how does this differ from sustainability or corporate social responsibility? And I just want to show you two interesting quotes from CEO of Unilever, who actually said that, you know, corporate purpose is core to how the entire business operates. So it's not something peripheral. And also a quote from Keith Weed, the former chief marketing officer of Unilever. And he actually said that CSR might even undermine purpose by creating a mentality that if you do something good, then for the rest of the company can go on with the things they always do. So if we make a comparison between purpose, sustainability, and CSR, maybe there is an overlap in outcomes. And so sustainability is goal is to achieve a balance between societal, ecological, and political systems. CSR, yeah, that organization and managers should stick to their moral responsibility from the business ethics field, but purpose is more integrative, integrating a social purpose into a viable business strategy. And so I think the main differentiator here is that purpose has a much broader scope. So firms can, of course, focus on sustainability and CSR, but they can do it a little bit. But purpose is something that relates to the core of your business. So probably you cannot have a little bit of purpose. You have a purpose or you don't have a purpose. Now, given this definition of corporate purpose, we started with a research project in which we asked ourselves, why do firms develop a purpose-driven strategy? How do they do it? And what do they accomplish with a purpose? And this is this is a sneak preview of some of our results from a large research project funded by the Foundation for Management Studies. It's a multiple case study. Companies like Shell, Philips, Randstad, Heineken participate in the study, and we did many interviews, more than 70 interviews, and for each company we interviewed the CEO, board member, supervisory board member, some other internal stakeholders, could be a young group, could be a works council, and also various external stakeholders. And so this resulted in 70 interviews, more than 800 pages of interview transcripts. And of course, this is a project which I did with these very nice colleagues. Well, you see them over here. I already introduced in the introduction Pushpika. But based on all those interviews, we did first order and second order and third order coding. And based on that, we derived this process model. And in this process model, you see some antecedents of purpose-driven strategy. Well, I won't discuss them all, but very important is this founder or CEO, but also this attention of supervisory board members. But it can be also more employee driven. But for most of the companies, it was much more external. For instance, ABN AMRO and PwC, there was more regulatory push for societal and environmental performance. But for some companies, also the investors, for instance, NXP Semiconductors, the investors want them to develop a purpose. Then we derived various practices, formal and informal practices. I will discuss them in a minute. And of course, we looked at the outcomes of companies with a strong purpose. While they are able to create some strategic change in line with their purpose, they were able to signal their values and attract like-minded stakeholders. but also very important, they were able to prioritize the needs of non-sharing stakeholders and also to create some harmonization between the interests of different stakeholders. But there are also negative effects. For some of them, it's still, they instill perceptions of hypocrisy. And also sometimes they choose for certain stakeholders and ignore other stakeholders. Maybe to finalize about these practices, so what do purpose-driven organizations do? Well, the purpose statement is specific, long-term, and also quantified, and of course has a social dimension. So here you see the purpose of Randstad. You see it's very transparent, but it's also quantifiable when you have achieved that purpose. Well, for other companies, the purpose is much more superficial and hard to measure. Also, there are all kinds of incentives for achieving the purpose. So the strategy is aligned with the purpose. There are key performance indicators, and also the remuneration of board members is linked to the purpose. For instance, here for Randstad, the non-financial targets are very important for remuneration of board members. And also the purpose is very much translated in details and core values, and also very strong communication. So there's a very strong onboarding process of purpose. For instance, within in KLM, they very much focused on onboarding the purpose, and so that everybody commits to that purpose. And also, and I think this is very important, that the purpose is also communicated to external stakeholders. There are many stakeholder dialogues. They also have dilemma sessions with various stakeholders. So they engage a lot with external stakeholders around purpose. And of course, there are many informal characteristics of practices, so that the culture is aligned with purpose, central among TMT. And it's also embodied by top managers. So so purpose-driven companies apply certain practices to really implement this purpose. And as I showed you in this process model, they also are able to achieve certain benefits when companies have a very strong purpose. Yeah, I should stop here. So I would end with also my second discussion question. So my first discussion question was, how is purpose different from CSR or sustainability? And my final question for discussion is purpose. So in the strategy field, of course, long ago we talked about the mission of companies. So purpose, is it old wine in new bottles, or is it indispensable for legitimacy and long-term success of any organization? And I would leave it over here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that presentation. Some really interesting thoughts that will surely be ground for some interesting discussion in a moment. At this point, do we have any clarification questions? Or maybe any urgent comments anyone would like to make before we move to the next? Okay, there's a comment in the chat from Ralitza. Can you see it, Henk? Or Ralitza, do you just want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And my comment is directed both to Henk and to Xavier, who is commenting on basically this, whether it's old wine in new bottles. And my question is, how did this discussion on purpose originate? Was it in industry talks or consultants or academia? If you want to know.
Yeah, of course, I cannot give you the right answer because I don't know, but I know and now I'm talking for the Dutch situation, this is a very important topic in industry, but also in politics. And so the Netherlands has many multinationals, and there is a huge debate what is their added value, and they very much focus on economic goals, but they also should focus on some societal goals. And this is an ongoing discussion. And this discussion we see also in industry. So, for instance, the employer associations in the Netherlands now also says that companies, large companies or public companies, should not only have an economic goal but also a social goal. And of course, we also see in the corporate governance literature and also in strategy field, we see this discussion, and we see, for instance, in Gary George's recent publication in JOM on purpose-driven organization. So I think it comes from various angles, but I think it started in the field, in the industry. And it's an ongoing discussion, and it also relates to discussions we had in the past about the shareholder or stakeholder model, or if you want, the Anglo-Saxon versus the Rhineland model, but that was very much focused on corporate governance.
Okay, thank you. I think that's really yes, Anna, sorry. You're muted.
If I may jump in, and so maybe I eat up some of my part of my talk, but given that Henk proposed the focus on purpose, I think it might be proper. I mean, we are now returning to a debate that is actually very old and present even in law. Since you know, in the last century, and what I might stress is that, for example, in the case of Olivetti, you probably know the Olivetti enterprise, and the head of Olivetti had in the middle of the last century has a writing, do enterprise have ends, goals, purposes? And that was a big debate in politics and law. In civil law, and here a link to the problem of whether we should, we are too dependent on the debate in framing United States term, because the common law lost the purpose, but in the law for having the statement that the firm is constituted for any lawful purpose. While in civil law, the contract setting up the firm should still specify some object of activity, for example. And so in civil law, some purpose in the sense more of a object of activity is present. Second is present the recognition of a function in the society, that the firm is recognized by the state because it has a function that is useful for society in terms of project, concrete, substantive. And so that's independent from any goal that the shareholder or the associate may have. So I think that this distinction should be made, and probably, as Xavier also noticed, the term purpose is somehow to be specified, because it's even present in law, at least in Europe. And one thing is the object, the nature of activity, one thing, and so forth. Just, yeah, and perhaps I have something else to say in my speech on the purpose and structure problem.
Yeah, Anna, I completely agree with you. But we were interested, how do companies cope with it? So we just looked at what large companies do, and for instance, within Heineken, for instance, they started a manifesto rethinking what is the purpose of Heineken. So actually also companies in what we call sin industries, for instance, alcoholic beverages, or Shell, fossil energy, even those companies are thinking about purpose, starting to create manifestos. And so there is something going on, and it comes from outside, but it also comes from, it comes more and more also from inside. So also from within Shell, you have a kind of rebellion group, which is actually more active, forcing them to reconsider purpose than maybe their outside stakeholders. But so it's a legal question, but we were very much interested in the empirical questions. How do companies cope with it, and why are they so concerned about purpose? Because this young generation within these companies, they don't know a lot about the legal aspects, but they are very much concerned about the purpose of the company they're working for.
Okay.
Xavier, you had something to jump in.
Yes, thank you so much, Katharina. And thank you so much, Henk, for the presentation. I do think that the empirical work that you're doing is very important and very interesting. I'm just concerned that adopting the word purpose in the way that some colleagues from the US, such as Rebecca Henderson and others, are proposing is dangerous. It's dangerous for two reasons. First, because as Anna already pointed out, we have existing terms such as mission and goals, but I would say particularly mission, that have been long-standing terms in the field, from the US also, by the way, from the early colleagues at Harvard Business School, Andrews and Christensen and others. And so I think that there is an issue of parsimony, but also there is a very dangerous ideological stance here, which I think that we should be aware that we are actually imposing on the word purpose, which is defined in the dictionary, a particular value orientation, which I'm not discussing whether it's right or wrong, but we are imposing it on the word purpose. And I think that that's dangerous. So that will be my two cautions about adopting the term as they are proposing to define it. And yeah, I think we should be more true to our European roots and and not be so dependent on our US colleagues. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I very good statements, and I agree with that. We should not come up with new concepts if we do have existing concepts. But when we started to do this empirical research, actually, we didn't start with the word purpose, but actually the idea was, why are companies more focused on are also considering their, not only their economic goal, but also their social contribution. And then when we did the interviews, they all came up with their purpose statement. And then they had a purpose, and then they had a manifesto, and it was quite recent. So although I agree with you, Xavier, that we do have concept already in the past, apparently firms are using it. And if you look at the annual reports, for instance, now of Randstad, it's full with purpose. And also they develop metrics for how they to calibrate the achievement of purpose. So it's an empirical phenomena, which I think we should investigate.
Okay, if Xavier wants to...
Xavier doesn't agree.
Well, is the hand still up, or is it...
yeah, right. No, I wanted to, okay. Yeah, I wanted to respond if there is time for it.
Yeah. Quickly, yeah.
Quickly, sure. So I think it's dangerous, again, because I think I'm not arguing that companies might talk about purpose and they might include certain values and goals within their definition of purpose. But the problem is that we as researchers, as academics, if we are redefining the term purpose to necessarily include certain particular specific values, I think that that's what's problematic. And as Anna said, and as you also mentioned, Henk, the corporate governance literature has been struggling with this for at least 30 years. And there are experiments in France with corporation à mission, actually, using the word mission and not purpose, right, on this. So that's my concern. So again, I'm not challenging at all that we study what they're doing and how they're using it, the word purpose. But I think that if we propose a redefinition of purpose, necessarily including certain values, I think that that's not parsimonious and it's dangerous. In addition to the fact that there is a word mission. And by the way, the social objectives is something which is perennial to the organizational theory field in general, in the notion of organizational effectiveness, which since the 70s in Steers and others, has many different dimensions or goals and not just profitability. And it has been actually the issue of not-for-profits to have many different goals. And we have actually also rediscovered recently by some, redefining them as social enterprises or hybrid organizations. But I think these are another instance of relabeling. Sorry, I was a bit longer than I planned.
Yeah, no, but I agree with you. But I also think that we in the strategy field, of course, also should absorb these new phenomena and deal with it. But we have to be critical, but maybe from a pragmatic view. For instance, I'm a member of supervisory board of NXP Semiconductors, which had a very strong shareholder focus. And what I see is that they are now rethinking their purpose. And I see, actually, I see that although they worked on CSR and also sustainability initiative, but it was very much in the periphery. By more relabeling and focusing on purpose, this becomes more central in the company. So from a pragmatic field, and now I behave as a kind of more activist scholar, I see it has a very positive contribution. But we have to remain critical on the concept. That I buy in.
Okay, I saw Jean-Eric has raised his hand.
But I'll be very short because, in fact, I was going to say exactly what Henk has already said, that while the academic debate is very interesting, we have to use the opportunity of this movement to really help into this transformation of the companies, and I think the label of purpose-driven strategy works very well, and the important thing is the impact that it has into the world more than the academic debate, which we still have to do them, but not going against this thing. I think the activist part is very important here. I shut up.
All right, no, thank you for that. Okay. This is a lively discussion, so it's really interesting. Maybe we come back to some of these points at the end of it and see how this relates to maybe some of the other topics that we're covering in the panel. So I'll hand over to Anna if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try.
Oh yeah, this is much better. We can see each other again.
It should be. I mean, it's saying that I cannot share my screen if someone else is sharing the screen. Okay.
Yeah, I stopped share. You can share now.
Okay. All right. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can you see? Can you see something? Actually, you can see the end, I guess, which is not what should happen. Even though it's. I mean. This presentation, we refer to a stream of works that in papers and on the nature of the firm, the responsibility of governance that I perhaps just refer to at the end. Now I wish to focus on the invitation, so and the theme of this event, which is very much centered on challenging a bit the notion of purpose and the notion of stakeholder from the based on taking more seriously the implication of uncertainty. I mean, there are other reasons for challenging. We already discussed about the problem about the purpose definition, but some of the point that I will make raise some or point out some caveat or risk or consequences if the difficulty of stating purpose, of knowing and stating goals and purposes, at least in some notion. And the same for responsibility, and the same is for the notion of stakeholder. This dates back to some criticism of the, or also need for renewal of the notion of a stake-based notion of who has right in to voice or to governance, dating back to a book in 2004 on corporate governance and firm organization. This is one of the references. This is one of the first references. So to be brief, because I think I have 10 minutes, okay? If we, these are to zoom on the two concepts that we are talking about. So of course they are a little bit fuzzy, but the sustainability is a very green concept. Actually, the first use of the concept dates back in the 1700s and was used for governing forests in Germany. So ecological concern, limit to growth problem. So the MIT, the Club of Rome, that's also used the term. Then it became now in the definition of the World Commission, development that meets the need of the present without compromising the needs of the future generation. So what I want to stress is that there is a component of the concept that has to do with future consequences, not always predictable. And responsibility is also capacity for responding for consequences, particularly, and this is something that I have been stressing many times, particularly unintended consequences, difficult to foresee. So there is a baseline responsibility of the firm, any that has to do with taking responsibility erga omnes for unforeseen consequences. So one of my points has been that there is a part of responsibility, a part of social responsibility that is not an optional. It is one of the raison d'etre of the modern firm. It's in the law, and it's the responsibility is not that narrow, because if we figure out that there is civil responsibility for any negative, at least the consequence bearer part of the responsibility should be there. So Henk says, well, it's welcome that, certainly it's welcome that managers, directors are reorienting toward these aspects. But the fact that the law has been forgotten for decades under the shadow of the shareholder value movement, well, does not mean that law is not to be used. I mean, it's a weapon, it's there. So why don't we leverage, or even the manager, why don't they leverage on the responsibility that should be there? It's not a matter of a voluntary act, octroyer, good intent. Okay, but beyond this, the two consequences, I would work more on the consequences of uncertainty, because that is the more, I think, less explored. The older literature on sustainability and responsibility is focused more on interest rather than knowledge, on who, and is not very prominent, at least in the academic in our research. The problem that these two concepts have in common, the uncertainty of consequences in terms of externalities, future effect, consequences for unidentified actors. So, and here I come to the challenge for the stakeholder notion and purpose notion. So the classic notion of stakeholder, in addition to have some other problems, have some problems. Well, the most, I know that the purpose of Freeman were very nice and define the stakeholders, any identifiable actor affected or affecting an organization. Well, that's, can you see, even if the purpose was very nice, the consequences are a different thing. For example, this notion is very based on influence and interest and having a stake, but what if stakeholders are not identifiable? What if they are not even actors? They are saying, what if stakeholders do not even know what the consequences are even for themselves? And this is the criticism that I've done other times, saying from stakeholding to right holding, because there can be right without stakes, or there can be purposes without stakeholders that herald or push them, or watchdogs. So if, in any case, the provocation, given that I have been invited to be provocative even, is should we go perhaps beyond this issue of having a stake, or define the stake in a different way? Okay, and to give an example, no, not to give an example, this is going, let me, the example may be here. Why we may give rights precisely where there is uncertainty and the need for innovation. We want expert, brilliant minds in the board, even disinterested actors rather than stakeholders. So that's what I mean. And again, maybe the Olivetti case may be a good case. I mean, even if he put in the board the best philosopher, psychologist, sociologist of his time, or architects. Okay, so they didn't have any stake. Okay, they had brilliant minds that were disinterested. They had no stake, and they that's why they were so innovative. So that's a possible provocation. Another issue is whether to bet on purpose or on structure. So one of the problem or the criticism that I would do also toward this overemphasis only on purpose, or a lot of emphasis on purpose, and why managers talk only about purposes. And one possible response or caveat is, you know, they don't touch the power structure. They don't touch the decision structure. They think so and fix the purpose. So the real question is, who decide on purpose? How the purpose can be changed? What is the constitution that regulates purpose changes according to circumstances? And in fact, purpose needs to be changed. And here, for example, I had this, I didn't want you to read before. It was a testimony. I interviewed one senior president of at the Academy of Management in 2015. Okay, this is a company dedicated to the cure of environment. So that's the object of activity of the company. So can you see? So there is no real need to, that's the purpose. Or that I would prefer to call a project or object, because the firm, as we see very well in startup, are based and act on projects and or objects of activity. So that's what they are. And this is a way of defining purpose that has not necessarily, does not need to be social. Social enterprise, even so in this case they choose the benefit corporation, but they could have chosen the flexible purpose corporation, which was a form of enterprise in the California law present for a while. Then it became conflated into the B Corp. But in any case, basically, they say we discussed for 2 years on how to define the purpose or the benefit that we should serve, and then we got stuck about the how to regulate the changes, and the composition of board seemed to be critical matter for defending the purpose, and we are now wondering whether we should defend the firm even from ourselves and the change in the composition of the board. So the issue is more complicated, and I think what is the implication of these difficulties, and I developed this more in some writing, is that do not forget structure. So if only purpose, the purpose alone is not enough. It's welcome that it is defined in terms of project, what the function, what of the enterprise, but it should be accompanied by governance structure, board composition, rule for changing the purposes, so the constitution that regulates the ongoing activities, because otherwise it's incomplete, or anyway, it all depends on the goodwill of whoever is declaring that they are pursuing such a kind of purpose. Okay, so the second, I stopped because I have to close. I already quoted Adriano Oliveira. I have some other cases. Another consequences of uncertainty is proactive responsibility. So go beyond the set of demand of interested player and imagine something that is even more innovative that with respect to the question. And this is my closure. Yes?
No problem, borrowing.
All right, thank you.
No, this is my closure. So in sum, the consequences of uncertainty is that focus on purpose, but flexible and at the constitutional level, very abstract, because otherwise it will fix too much and it will take an enormous time to fix them or decide them. Second, do not forget the structure as a complement. How do you change a constitution for changing? And third, rather than having someone that is always the same, that are the classic shareholder or the in-charge manager that take into account the interests of someone else, find a way of representing properly with these voices. That's it.
All right, thank you. I think that provided some really interesting insights. Do we have one clarification question or two? But then I think we should move on to the second part and maybe hold a longer discussion for the end. Xavier, is that a new hand up or is it?
Yes, yes, I hear you with the timing issue. I just feel bad that we took so much time for Henk and there might be no time for Anna. And I'm such a big fan of Anna, I can't resist. But just let me say, I think, Anna, you brought super important issues and as always, very insightful views. I have two quick, one clarification question and maybe a comment, quick one. The clarification question is, I in the intro management course to the bachelor's in Lausanne, I teach about governance and I actually put the definitions of responsibility among others. And the dictionary says that being accountable to your own acts as well as others' behavior, which I find, very challenging. So I would have a question for that, and about the uncertainty about how can or the information that you have about what others are doing, right? You might maybe know about your own actions, but others' actions, do you know? How can you know really what they're doing? But I also found your point about stakeholder approach very interesting. But maybe the question about responsibility, I guess, will be my question. Thank you.
But if I have to respond, what precisely is the question about responsibility?
So would you include like the dictionary, the accountability vis-a-vis one's own actions as well as the actions of others, given the limited information set regarding what the others do?
Responsibility about the action of others. Yes, it is included. It is included in the notion of civil responsibility. And of course, it must be included. And actually, managers are responsible, or the CEO is responsible for the act of anyone in the enterprise, even if they don't know what they are doing. Okay, so that's an important point. And when people say that the legal responsibility is very narrow, no, it's not very narrow. Actually, it's very challenging. I mean, in the director or CEO go to, when they don't go even to jail, so you have even penal responsibility, but at least they are responsible for the damages, even very far. But we do the same. The civil responsibility for driving a car. I mean, or even if the car is managed by someone else, you have a responsibility. Some responsibility you can insurance for, some other you have to pay indemnity, and for some other you have even penal. There is even a penal responsibility. All these are part of the responsibility. Yes. I would include them. Let me interrupt my screen sharing.
Yeah. Right, there is a last point from Xavier about the responsibility and external partners such as suppliers and distributors. I don't know, I'm feeling we're diving into like a whole different area here, which is very important, but maybe we hold that part of the discussion until the end, just to give every panelist some time. All right, thank you for very interesting discussions. That was really nice. I'll hand over to the next panel, where we're going to take a closer look at where we go from here. So a bit even more forward looking, like what are we going to do with all of this? So please, Nuno, if you want to.
Yep. Thank you, Katharina. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces and good friends of this initiative at EURAM. Yes, if we thought we'd be in shortage of ideas for further research, well, we got it wrong, because there clearly are so many things to think about. And to continue the conversation, I'd like to introduce the first panelist, Tomi Laamanen from Gallen University. He's also the editor-in-chief from Long Range Planning, which was established in 1968 to study strategic management. We already mentioned some early definitions and ideas that perhaps got forgotten with time. So perhaps Tomi can also illuminate us a bit on those issues. And you'd like to talk about precisely some emerging directions in strategic management research, perhaps with a European perspective. Tomi, you should be able to share your screen if you need to, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno. And do you hear me well?
Yeah, it's all great. Yeah.
Perfect. That's always the scary part, because you haven't said anything so far, and suddenly if it's your turn and then nobody hears you. So thank you very much for the organizers for having me. I know that we are pressed for time, so I will try to do my million slides in a very compact fashion. So what I wanted to address briefly, and as a disclaimer, I actually deliberately chose not to talk about sustainability, because I knew that we have the previous session fully on sustainability, and obviously sustainability is one of the really big emerging directions also in strategy research. I think in long range planning, if I roughly my finger feel of how many sustainability papers we keep on getting, it's probably 1/3 of the inflow that is somehow tackling some aspects of sustainability and strategy. So it is a really growing field. Almost one could say that, and I think it's not yet time to say that, but almost that way, that it starts to be almost too much, right? That the overall quality of research starts already a little bit going down, because there's so many different things that people try to do. In terms of the emerging direction strategies research, the way I see it, I also have my own biases there, as you can in a second see. But what I was very intrigued about was that when I saw the strategy management SIG themes, I mean, that is a pretty good summary of the emerging directions of strategy research, in fact. So it's very timely, and each of these areas are very fresh and actually nicely highlight what is the emerging direction. So one could almost say that by listening through all of these sessions and looking through them, you're very up to date on the emerging directions in strategy research. But, however, I noticed that also you kind of chose not to put the sustainability as a separate bubble here, and I guess it's because it's pervading. It's in all of these topic areas in some ways embedded inside. The other thing that I see, and what I would like to make is one core argument, and that is that I think, and like I said, this is my own bias, that I think there would seem to be a kind of process turn in many of these areas, and let me demonstrate that a little bit, or try to prove that argument. And yes, it's the bias that I got when we were writing this special issue in SMJ. However, this thought was really embedded actually when we were there in Glasgow 2017, listening to Robert Kia telling about the process ontology and how we would need to understand better the process ontologies in different topic areas. And I still think that we incorporated it obviously as one of the messages in this special issue, that we need to go deeper into analyzing what constitutes the process ontology underlying our research. And we did a very rough attempt in trying to kind of model the super complex reality, which this is not really doing good justice on, to think about what are the different practices and issues and things that are happening everywhere, and try to see that how that could kind of enable us to better understand organizations and organizing and strategy development processes and practices for that matter. And the intersection that we were looking there was that maybe the process ontology enables us actually to bring together the practice research and the process research. So now, looking beyond that, I started thinking that, and when you look at through some kind of lens, then everything seems like processes suddenly. And when I looked at these different topic areas, I felt that this almost like this kind of overarching process turn. When you look at the topic areas and what is happening in different research stream, I took here a couple of examples, and I know that I don't have the time in this short speech to cover those, but think of the resources and capabilities research, which was at the beginning of 1990s. It was pretty much Barney and relatively static critique of the Porterian industry organization perspective. And later, when we've seen the development of the resource-based view and the emergence of the dynamic capabilities perspective, it has made it more processual. We want to understand how the new resources are being created, how they emerge. And the other aspect that started coming gradually was to see how they evolve in the business models. How it's not only any more resources, it's not only the process, but it's also how the process leads into these clusters of capabilities into business models that then constitute the value. And even in business model research, we then had this evolution towards the business model innovation, rather than looking at business models as static constructs, but how do they evolve? Do they evolve based on their individual capabilities, individual activities, characteristics, or do they evolve more through the cognitive processes that managers are having? So in principle, if you take the whole stream, the way I would see it, from the resource-based view to the dynamic capabilities to the business models and business model innovation, we've seen this kind of processization or process turn happening in this literature stream. And then we've gained a better understanding of how these bundles develop, how they evolve, and how they create competitive advantage for us. The other area that kind of was there already in a dynamic manner was the network research. How do networks and alliance relationships develop dynamically? How do they, over time, evolve, and how do the different players' roles they emerge? And now when we look at this research stream, we did something on the digital TV industry, but if we look at the research stream more broadly today, it is more about ecosystems. It's not anymore necessarily networks, but it's how ecosystems emerge, how they develop. It's interesting, we do have lots of that happening in the entrepreneurship research, where we look at how do we envision, how do we visualize ecosystems, but we do have also in the more core ecosystems research, this dynamic aspect becoming more and more important. Also the different SMJ articles that look at the competition in ecosystems and how that evolves, right? Competitive dynamics research, you could say, well, it's been processual always, but if you look at the past competitive dynamics reviews, 2002 review article mentions only 7 times the word process. And the only thing that they refer to is that they say maybe we need more longitudinal studies on competitive dynamics. Then you look at the classical Chen model of competitive dynamics. Yes, it's dynamic, but somehow the feedback loop is not that strongly influenced. When we come to 2012, the word process already emerges 31 times in the review article. And then when you look at that, you notice that, oh, there's the sequences of activities, there's the interactions, there's the overall dynamic and the decision making and the micro that we need to understand better And then when the competition research stream started gaining ground, it was all about the process already. If you look at the recent special issue that the long-range planning published on the competition strategies with many of the authors and editors also here present, the central part of that was that how competition is actually managed as a process inside this dynamic. So now M&A research, I know that there's several M&A scholars here. I don't need to emphasize for you that it's also a process. The interesting thing is though that if you look at the process aspects of M&A research, oftentimes we focused on the integration part. Yes, Jamison and Sitkin were talking about both pre-process, post-process aspects, but the integration part has been mostly discussed as the process. The pre-acquisition part, not that much, and that was also what we wanted to call for that one should look at more of the process aspects also of the pre-acquisition. And there's lots of things to look at. We can look at the competitive bidding decisions that the companies do. We can look at whether companies act when other ones act. We can look at the acquisition programs that they enter different markets. So we can go to the big tech and look at how they are maneuvering their strategies through series of acquisitions in a processual manner, evolving and molding their companies, and so to say morphing the businesses that they are doing. Now, finally, you would say that, well, at least strategy implementation has been process focused. It's practically a process topic. But look at the classical strategy implementation research. Classical strategy implementation research was looking at how the top management team takes the strategy, develops the implementation plans, the different structures, controls, and incentives, and then gives it to the organization and say, do it. So that's not that much of a process story in itself. However, then if you look at the more recent work that has looked at how the middle management then reacts to it, what do they do? Do they start resisting it, or do they start boycotting it in there? That brings us already processual aspect. And if you then add there the feedback loop, how these two bring together, we see how we can start building the organization almost. So even there, we have had this kind of process turn happening, but it's still much more work to be done. So to conclude, organizations are complex phenomena. There's all the things happening everywhere all the time, and the overall this complex system is in a motion to go onwards. And somehow it's of course natural that as we get better and better in these different strategy topics, be it capabilities, be it alliances, ecosystems, business models, acquisitions, be it implementation, we do have this kind of processual need to understand better how we deal with time and processes when things are happening inside the organization. So let me finish here. We do have theoretical lenses with which one can look at, for example, the attention-based view is something with which we can address the process. We have the paradox research that the competitive dynamics scholars have looked at, but okay, now I will stop here so that we have some time for discussion and for the other presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and congratulations on being the ones who create the emerging directions for future strategy research.
Thank you, Tomi. That's an excellent presentation and draw our attention to these process turn and across different areas. So maybe we could take some clarification questions for Tomi before we move on. You are welcome to unmute yourself or type them on the chat. Don't be too conscious about the time. We'll still manage it. Okay, so maybe we can then connect that to the next topic, Tomi, if it's okay. And I would like to introduce our next speaker. Martin Park is a professor at Bristol University, and we asked him to be thought-provoking, which of course was unnecessary kind of request. If you know his work, you know that he does that for a living. So I'd like to introduce Martin. Would like to talk to you about the business school of the future. And I think that we're all very interested to hear what you have to say. Martin, so perhaps Tomi, if you could just stop
Tomi, yeah.
sharing the screen so that Martin can use the screen should he need to. Okay, yeah, so floor is yours, and thank you for attending.
Thank you, Nuno, and thank you for inviting me. Obviously, as you all know, well, hopefully, I'm not a strategy scholar, so my comments may not land in the right places because there might be all sorts of things that you are all doing that I just don't know about. I've also got a nasty a nasty sort of instinct for making wild generalizations. So I'll make some wild generalizations in the hope that you can see them as provocations rather than descriptions of what anybody here is particularly doing. I've got a short presentation, so let me just share that. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, it's all good. Sound and image is fine.
Okay, let me just see if I can move the bar in order to make this work. So I've got a very old and very slow computer, which it likes to kind of make me anxious by just taking a long time to respond to any of the keystrokes. There it is. Okay. So towards the business school of the future then, I mean, this is a kind of a deliberately optimistic presentation in the sense that what I want to be talking about relatively briefly are the kinds of things I think business schools should be teaching and researching. Just a couple of comments on the three presentations so far. One is I'm very keen on not being deluded by the promises of large companies, particularly big corporations who've talked about culture and vision and mission and strategy and all sorts of things for years and years and years. And I don't see any particular reason to assume that purpose is any different in that regard. So I'm kind of convinced that, you know, Anna's onto something when she's talking about the importance of baking in purpose with particular kinds of structure. I assume that that's the only way we can get some of these big organizations to actually fulfill the kind of promises that they're very keen to make. Secondly, I'm assuming that questions of sustainability in the context of climate change are now opening up criticisms of capitalism in ways that simply weren't possible 20 or 30 years ago, without you being seen as some kind of lunatic communist. Effectively, it is now so blindingly obvious that the operations of business and capitalism globally is provoking a species-changing threat that it's simply not possible to suggest that everything is rosy in the garden. And changes need to happen, and those changes need to be understood as fundamental and not simply a kind of a cosmetic attempt to pretend that the business as usual can continue. And then the third thing I want to just underpin, I suppose, is something about normative commitments here. It seems to me that business schools almost kind of at the moment, more than any other part of higher education, really should be cultivating their normative commitments and academics being much clearer about the kinds of the sort of futures that they would like to be cultivating, rather than simply falling back on that sort of rather tired trope of somehow being scientists who are looking at the world rather than attempting to change it. So those are kind of my three sort of responses to what's been said so far. As some of you probably know, oh, of course, it wouldn't work now, would it? Sorry. This is my hopeless, oh, there it is, there we go. As some of you probably know, I've been sort of fairly noisy about the idea that we really do need to radically reconstitute the business school. And in this book from a couple of years ago, what I tried to argue was that business schools were kind of fatally flawed, really, in terms of their reproduction of particular models of capitalist enterprise. And I kind of summarized that in three ways. One is the sort of the reproduction of certain ideas about the corporation as being the poster kid of organizations, and consequently the marginalization of all sorts of other organizational forms, co-ops, mutuals, and so on. Which kind of speaks to Anna's point, I think. Secondly, the pro-growth orientation of a great deal of business school research. So the assumption is that, you know, something has to grow in order to be good, and the bigger it is, the better it is, and so on. Whether that's economies or organizations or number of customers or whatever the thing might be. And then thirdly, the idea of management itself as a particular kind of form of organization that embeds information asymmetry and hierarchy, and effectively naturalizes the idea that we need a cadre of organizers to organize us, and that those people should be paid better than the rest of us, and are somehow special because they can see the world in ways that the rest of us don't. Now, in Shut Down the Business School, after I've been through my kind of pessimistic moaning about what's wrong with business schools, I then moved to putting forward the idea of something I call a school for organizing, which is an attempt to kind of reconstitute the business school in a way after we've bulldozed it, but to reconstitute it on very different principles. And in a more recent piece of work, a piece just published in Organization, what I tried to do is kind of distill that sort of school for organizing idea into a manifesto with 10 points. So let me just very briefly talk about this this sort of attempt to produce a 10-point manifesto for the business school of tomorrow. So first of all, I think that it is unarguable that business is the major, if not, we could argue, the only generator of carbon on the planet. So every single module that we teach, regardless of topic, whether it's strategy or accounting or organizational behavior or finance or anything else, must teach about carbon reduction without exception. This is going to be uncomfortable for quite a lot of business school academics who kind of assume that even if sustainability is a question, it's somebody else's question rather than theirs. But I want to make sure that people, you know, the kind of people who are doing the most extreme form of capital markets research, for example, or are looking at questions of logistics and operations or whatever, are all teaching about carbon reduction. That's simply necessary. A second aspect of that, I think, is that ideas about globalization and growth as some sort of measure of success need to be balanced in empirical terms by an emphasis on localization, shortening supply chains, and steady state business practice. In other words, to get away from this idea that the poster kids are the ones that grow, rather than the ones that you know, have been bubbling along quite nicely. And there's plenty of examples of organizations that aren't exciting. You know, they're not thrilling. They're not buying other organizations. They're not producing cutting edge technology and so on, but they're doing useful things and supplying jobs and goods. Thirdly, 99% of organizations are not corporations. And our teaching case studies simply don't reflect that. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority of organizations are small, either micro businesses or SMEs. And I think our teaching cases need to reflect that and stop fetishizing, you know, big companies like Apple and Amazon and all the rest of them. Fourth, this is a series of demands, isn't it? So I'd written this out for this paper, but as I'm reading it, it really does sound very strident. So apologies if I sound quite shouty. Most organizations are based outside the global north, yeah, the vast majority. So I think it is entirely reasonable, if we like to present ourselves as being decolonized and global, that at least 50% of our teaching cases should come from outside the global north too, so that we use teaching cases from Africa, from Asia, from parts of the world, from South America, from parts of the world that are traditionally not very well represented in the kind of the global business school system. Fifth, all programs should contain credit-bearing modules of some description on third sector organizations and alternative businesses. This to me is absolutely vital, and it's kind of echoing Anna's point that we need to be teaching about community-based businesses, alternative organizations of different kinds. If you like, the idea of building in, of baking in purpose seems to me only possible to understand if we think about legal changes to ownership and control structures. Then the next five, then I'll stop shouting. I think that the business school really does need to be organically connected to other parts of the university and other disciplines. In the UK, and your experience may well be different in other parts of Europe, the business school is increasingly sequestered from the rest of the university. There's an active discussion at my institution now about whether or not we should be part of the social sciences or whether we should become a separate faculty. And that seems to me a disastrous move if it separates us out from sociology and politics, as well as a whole series of humanities and science and science disciplines. 7, every qualification the school offers must have some reflection on ethics and politics. Business ethics isn't some kind of optional extra that people can do if they feel slightly guilty. It should be absolutely embedded in the kind of assumptions about practice that we teach through our schools. 8, large companies make big profits. So funded research should be skewed towards smaller organizations. It's my institution, again, I don't know if it's echoed at yours, that it is much easier to get research going with some big corporations because they've got the cash. And also because the state, my state, regards those big corporations as being quite important because they allegedly generate jobs and innovation and all the rest of it. I think we should positively skew towards the smaller stuff, towards the steady state stuff, and away from the idea, again, that the big corporation is somehow the poster kid, the most successful form of organizing. I also would like some changes, in the spirit of embedding this stuff in governance, some changes in the governance of business schools themselves to ensure that they're not captured. Many large European business schools are effectively captured by many of their big donors who have, lecture theatres named after them and endowed chairs and all the rest of it. I would like to embed a more civic responsibility by ensuring that third sector organisations and ordinary citizens in the cities that we're based in sit on the governing bodies of our schools and ensure that we are responsive to those kinds of interests rather than the people who shout loudest because they've got the most cash. And then finally, and I think this is a particularly British problem, but not only a British problem, the idea that the business school is supposed to be a hyper-profitable part of the university is probably the most dangerous aspect of what's happened in the UK over the last 20, 30 years. So effectively what we have is the business school being shaped, its curriculum, its assumptions being shaped by the idea that it is supposed to be the hyper-profitable cash cow that makes sure that the chemistry department and the vet school are kept open. And that skews us towards particular kinds of students, particular kind of teaching, particular kind of marketing. And one of the things I've been banging on about for quite a long time now is I want the business school to be, or my school for organising, whatever, to be treated like the sociology department, as being another social science discipline, and certainly not one that can be assumed to be the cash machine to build the new building, because there are all sorts of costs with that. Okay, that's enough of me shouting. These are the two things I've been trying to shout about. I'll shut up and hope that I've not offended too many of you, but I do hope I've offended some of you. Otherwise, there'd be nothing to talk about. Okay.
Thank you, Martin. Very sobering presentation and some very good ideas for this School of Organizing. I'm all intrigued by that. So maybe we could take questions. Oh, I see some hands up. I actually don't really see who was first. If you know who's first, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'll just randomly select. Okay. Yeah, just anyone who would like to ask a question. Now everyone decided to lower their hand, so didn't make it any easy. I think everyone was so busy really trying to take notes of your ideas that they forgot to prepare questions. But I think Liza Thomas has a question. Please, yeah, unmute yourself. Oh, great. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Can you see me and can you hear me?
All perfect.
Yes, I can.
Yeah? Okay. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Martin, for that chat. It's a subject that I follow your work and I'm very much interested in researching on the future of business schools. What I would like to know is, and I'm British by, my former with the Cardiff Business School, but now I'm in France, so I see two different sides of our model of business schools. What I would like to really know is, are you getting anywhere at Bristol with this? Because your ideas to me are, you know, just sound. How far is this being pushed in what's going on in governance at Bristol, or maybe at any other institutions you're familiar with?
The struggle continues, Lisa. Bristol hasn't had a business school up until now. It's probably the only big UK institution that hasn't had one. Had a big school of economics and a small department of management. It's now in process of producing a business school, and I'm actively lobbying and shouting about some of these sorts of ideas. The problem is always the money, because effectively, and as you're well aware, in the UK, the fact that we happen to speak the same language as the Americans means that we've been able to sell master's degrees to China pretty effectively, and that's been the key conveyor belt of cash that's allowed UK universities to expand and cross-subsidize. So as soon as you start talking about ideas, even kind of mild ones to do with, you know, decolonization, sustainability, diversity, whatever they might be, the big question raised in senior management is, will this damage the income? Yeah, that's the big fear. So there's a tricky politics in this, in trying to say that, effectively trying to say that if you want to be ahead of the game, if you want to be positioning your business school for the future rather than the past, this is the kind of stuff we need to be talking about. So it's a kind of an attempt to appeal to a future imagined student who I hope exists, and I kind of do believe exists, but at the same time, not trying to scare the horses too much by allowing them to think that this means that the business school won't be quite as profitable as it has been. But it's a continual struggle, and in every UK university I've worked in, which is a couple over the last 20, 30 years, this struggle's been kind of continual in a way, because most senior managers would like to carry on sweating their assets, and the most profitable courses in the UK, again, I don't know whether this applies in many of the countries that that this audience are from, are business, law, and psychology. They're the ones that make the most money. And so, you know, you can see this very predictable in virtually every UK university, this very predictable cross-subsidy between certain parts of social science and then down towards chemistry, vet school, and some other science, technology, medicine subjects. Yeah.
Okay, the top slicing, as they used to call it, from my.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, and good luck with pushing this forward.
Yeah, it's more than luck, I think, but yeah, just hope the angels are on my side.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Martin. Maybe the next, I see some hands up, so feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead with your questions. And by the way, the questions are open to all the panelists by now. So.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question to Martin, and perhaps if I may continue in your some tone of voice, if I may be a bit cheeky. I think you mentioned that we should have more of a sort of African or case studies from other parts than the Northern Europe, and I agree fully. I agree with everything you said, but I also like to ask whether perhaps the account of the situation you provided might be typically British. And by the same token, I could say that perhaps if we would take on Scandinavian or at least a Swedish perspective, I could say that I would say we have a very strong bias towards critical management theory, that kind of thinking in business studies today in Sweden. And so I think one of the problems that we struggle with today is that many business students in Sweden have a very shallow or simplified view of how firms organize or what management is really about. I mean, the complexities. And I think that's a danger. If we as scholars should be able to contribute, we need to have a fairly fine-grained map of the reality. And so I think that one problem that I would say is quite pressing in Sweden, at least in academia, is that business students in management, I should say, less so in finance, I think they have their own problems. But in management, that they really, I can't say they pay too much attention to non-profit organizations. That would be wrong, of course. But I think that we also might lose sight of what might have traditionally been seen as a main topic in our line of business. I think that's quite important not to lose that and That's my comment. So thank you very much for
I mean, I need to be careful not to agree with you too much, Svante, because I think in part I am polemicizing in order to, I'm over dramatizing a situation in order to generate some urgency. And I do think there's something very particularly British about my experience. The last time, I think it was just before lockdown, I was doing a talk in Copenhagen Business School. And as I was greeted by one of my friends there, and he said, "Ah, yes, more news from Mordor," sort of describing this idea that, you know, Copenhagen Business School is a bit like the Shire, and then these British academics come over and say, you know, just how terrible things are and all the rest of it. And I guess that's been our function for large parts of continental Europe, hasn't it? Is to almost provide a warning for what might happen if the state withdraws from higher education, you know, that kind of thing. Nonetheless, I do think that the kind of Anglo-American, as opposed to European continental, the Anglo-American version of management studies is the globally dominant one. You know, if you look at, I've been doing a couple of talks lately in India, and if you look at, you know, what most of the Indian institutes of management are teaching, they're basically trying to look a bit like Harvard or Wharton or something like that. You know, the kind of the assumption is that the best business schools are the ones, you know, the ones in the States, essentially. So they're reproducing a particular kind of model. I'm very keen on the idea that continental Europe is doing something different, and do acknowledge that. That shouldn't understate the urgency of the task, I think, that faces us. But yes, it's my picture is a bit too generalized there. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Dan Lucas, you would like to ask a question, also from the UK.
Yeah, this is also to Martin, and especially picking up on the issue with senior management of business school being very concerned about any of these changes hurting the income. But in doing that, are they not doing exactly that? Because if I talk to students, if I hear from students what they want to hear about, it's these things. It's sustainability, it's the impact organizations are having and companies are having on the world. So the students have moved on. And even being a UK academic myself, or academic in the UK, the students from China are also interested in these things. So are they not working on under this outdated assumption of what students want, rather than looking at what's actually going on in the world and adjusting to that?
I really hope you're right. Yeah, I really hope you're right. I think that I very often hear people making generalizations about what, you know, Generation X or the Millennials or Generation Z or something, you know, want and so on. But my perception is certainly that the students, the undergraduate students who I'm teaching now, have been brought up with the idea that climate change is an existential threat. You know, they've seen the images of the last polar bear dying on the last iceberg. They understand about environmental externalities and all the rest of it. You know, David Attenborough is one of their biggest heroes now. So in that sense, yes, I think you're right, that what doesn't seem to happen is the university marketing departments are convinced of that. Because what I'd really like to see on, say, my, you know, imaginary University of Bristol New Business School website is something like, do you want to be part of the problem or do you want to be part of the solution? Yeah, just make it very direct. So, and then, yes, let's teach about low carbon business, about inclusion, about diversity, etc., etc. And we say we're going to do that. But you look at the vast majority of business school websites in the UK, and I suspect in most parts of the globe, they are just, you know, they're basically selling fairy dust, aren't they? Saying, you know, if you come here, your income will go up and we'll teach you how to be a glamorous transformational leader who strides on and off planes and occupies the first class lounges in airports. You know, it's a kind of a sort of fairly crude marketing appeal to the worst aspects of what the most transactional aspects of what the student might want. And I think that's fantastically damaging. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but there are some people leaving, and I would like to take a picture of all of you. After we can continue the discussion, I guess, for a couple of minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna count until 3, and I have to take 2 pictures because we're a bunch of people. So at 3, you smile, okay? So 1, 2, and 3. Okay, perfect. And I have to take another one with the second screen. So give me a second. Okay, so 1, 2, and 3. Perfect. Thank you very much. We can continue the discussion for a couple of minutes, I guess.
Thank you, David. Is this the staff picture of the School of Organizing on the webpage?
That's right. The paparazzi are everywhere.
No, it's always very hard to cut these conversations, but perhaps we could take one last question, and then we really have to close down the conversation. I'm quite sure you can follow up, continue the conversation offline. But
maybe a very short remark, Martin. I think nowadays I see many business schools also very concerned about their purpose. So I see many business schools now creating kind of business school purpose, very much focused on how they contribute to the social development goals, etc. So I see also there quite active more reorientation of business schools of the future, which is not in line with the old model that we used to have.
Yeah. I really hope you're right, Henk. I mean, my fear is that some of this stuff is corporate social responsibility reinvented. But, it'd be nice to think that it was a serious rethinking of the purpose of the business school. Again, I go back to this idea that we have to bake it into the schools itself. So one of the things I've been trying to do in our school, for example, is simply to make sure that point 1, every single module must make reference to carbon reduction and climate change, just to make sure that's built into the audit processes of the school, so that when we are validating modules and when we're looking at our teaching programs, that these things are embedded, not kind of optional, not commitments that are made by the dean, in some other space, but are actually embedded, baked in, if you like, to the everyday quality assurance programs, quality assurance mechanisms that we have.
Okay, well, yes, thank you very much. I think we probably need to close it down here, but I'd like to thank everyone for attending and of course the presenters. We definitely got some thought-provoking ideas. That was the purpose, so I think that was achieved. So thank you so much. Have a good conference.
Nuno?
And yes.
Can I just make a short announcement? There is a symposium now.
Of course.
Following this session on the adoption of AI for customer interactions and product designs, also co-sponsored by these SIGs. So you're all welcome to that. There's a Professor Nicolas van Zerbroek from Belgium, Sandro Kaulards, who works with Eric van Hippel at MIT, and Sandro is based in Geneva, and also Professor Fanish Puranam from INSEAD, who is going to be